In the shadowy halls of Vane Manor, a priceless Vermeere vanishes, and its owner, Sir Henry Vane, is found stabbed with his own antique dagger. Enter Miss Jane Marple, a quiet spinster with a razor-sharp mind, unraveling a web of secrets among a grieving widow, a meticulous curator, a charming dealer, and a silent guard. A smudged frame, a scratched lock, a drop of blood. Every clue points to betrayal. Can Miss Marple pierce the veil of lies to catch a killer before the masterpiece is lost forever? The truth hides in the shadows, waiting to be seen. Chapter 1. The Gallery of Shadows. The autumn sun cast a feeble glow over St. Mary Mead, its light barely piercing the morning mist that clung to the village's cobblestone lanes. In her modest cottage on Danemead Lane, Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking with the steady rhythm of a metronome. The chrysanthemums in her garden nodded in the breeze, their colors muted under the gray sky. It was a morning like any other, save for the faint tremor of excitement that reached her ears through Cherry, her young maid, who bustled in with a tray of tea and gossip. "Terrible news, Miss Marple," Cherry said, her eyes wide as she set down the teapot. "Sir Henry Vane's been murdered up at the manor. Stabbed, they say, right in his gallery. The milkman heard it from the grocer, who got it straight from the constable's wife." Cherry's voice held the thrill of scandal, a rare treat. In their quiet village, Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild blue eyes sharpening behind her spectacles. "Murdered, you say? Dear me, how dreadful." Her tone was gentle, but her mind was already turning, sifting through the fragments of village life that might connect to such a crime. Sir Henry Vane was no ordinary resident. His collection of paintings was the talk of the county, a hoard of beauty locked away in Vane Manor's private gallery. "I suppose I ought to call on Mrs. Vane," she mused, folding her knitting. "A condolence visit would be proper." By noon, Miss Marple was walking up the winding drive to Vane Manor, her black lace-up shoes crunching on gravel. The manor loomed ahead, its Elizabethan facade draped in ivy, its windows like watchful eyes. The air carried a chill, and she pulled her shawl tighter, noting the silence that hung over the estate. No bird song, no rustle of leaves, as if the house itself mourned its master. At the door, she was met by Inspector Craddock, a youngish man with tired eyes and a respectful nod. "Miss Marple, I didn't expect to see you here," he said, ushering her into the oak-paneled hall. "Though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You've a knack for these things." "Merely a neighborly visit," she replied, her smile disarming. "But since I'm here, perhaps you might tell me what happened." Craddock sighed, leading her to the drawing-room, where a fire crackled half-heartedly. "Sir Henry was found this morning in his gallery, a dagger in his chest. One of those antique blades he collected, kept in a locked case. Time of death is estimated around midnight. We've got 4 suspects so far: his wife, Clara Vane; his Curator, Mr. Perciba; his art dealer, Mr. Langston; and the guard, Mr. Gibbs. All were at the manor last night." Miss Marple settled into a chinced armchair, her eyes scanning the room. A portrait of Clara Vane hung above the mantel, her painted gaze cool and distant. "A dagger from his own collection," she murmured. "How curious." "And the gallery was it locked?" "Always," Craddock said. "Only Sir Henry and the curator had keys. No signs of forced entry, though we're still checking. The odd thing is, one painting's missing of Vermeere, worth a fortune." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "A Vermeere? That would tempt many a soul." She sipped her tea, brought by a nervous maid, and observed the room's occupants. Clara Vane sat apart, her black dress stark against her pale skin, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Mr. Percival, a thin man with darting eyes, hovered near a bookshelf, adjusting his spectacles. Mr. Langston, sleek and polished, stood by the window, his smile too easy for a house of mourning. Mr. Gibbs, broad-shouldered and silent, guarded the door, his face unreadable, Clara mentioned dining with Sir Henry last night. Craddock continued. She retired early, heard nothing unusual. Percival says he locked the gallery at 10 and worked in his office. Langston claims he left by 9 after a business meeting. Gibbs was on patrol, saw nothing amiss. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing each detail. She noted Clara's rigid posture, the way Percival's fingers twitched, Langston's calculated charm, and Gibbs' stoic reserve. Grief was present, but so was something else, fear, perhaps, or guilt. The gallery, she said softly. Might I see it? Craddock hesitated, then agreed. The gallery was a long, dimly lit chamber, its walls adorned with masterpieces glowing under soft lights. The air smelled of polish and old canvas. At the far end, a chalk outline marked where Sir Henry had fallen, near an empty space where the Vermeere once hung. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the spot, then drifted to the dagger's case, its glass intact but for a faint smudge. Locked, you say? She asked. Yes, Craddock replied. No tampering, as far as we can tell. She nodded, her gaze sweeping the room, catching a faint irregularity in the dust on a nearby frame. People are so careless, she said, almost to herself, even in their secrets. As they returned to the drawing room, Miss Marple's thoughts were already weaving a pattern. A locked gallery, a missing painting, a dagger from a secure KCH thread pointed to someone close to Sir Henry, someone with access and motive. She smiled at Craddock, her expression as placid as ever. I shall call again tomorrow, she said, to see how Mrs. Vane is faring. But as she walked back to her cottage, the mist curling around her, Miss Marple knew she was not merely visiting. The gallery of shadows held a truth, and she would uncover it, one quiet observation at a time. Chapter 2. The Widows Vow. The afternoon light filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of Vane Manor's drawing room, casting a muted glow over the somber gathering. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed armchair, her knitting bag at her feet, her needles idle for the moment as she sipped tea from a delicate porcelain cup. The room, with its polished mahogany and somber portraits, seemed to hold its breath, as if unwilling to disturb the weight of tragedy that hung over the household. Sir Henry Vane's murder had shaken the foundations of this grand old house, and Miss Marple, ever the unobtrusive observer, was determined to unravel the threads of deceit that lay beneath its polished surface. Clara Vane, the widow, sat across from her, a vision of composed grief. Her black silk dress, impeccably tailored, accentuated her pale complexion, and her dark hair was swept into an elegant chignon, untouched by the chaos of the morning's discovery. Yet there was a brittleness to her, like a porcelain figure, poised to crack under the slightest pressure. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, betrayed a faint tremor, and her eyes, though dry, flickered with something Miss Marple could not yet name: sorrow, perhaps, or something less noble. Inspector Craddock had excused himself to confer with his constables, leaving Miss Marple to conduct her condolence visit with the air of a kindly aunt. But her mild blue eyes, sharp as ever behind her spectacles, missed nothing. She had already noted the portrait of Clara above the mantel, a striking likeness painted in her youth, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to the woman before her. The artist had captured a vivacity that seemed absent now, replaced by a guarded reserve. Mrs. Vane, Miss Marple began, her voice soft and sympathetic. I cannot tell you how deeply sorry I am for your loss. Sir Henry was a remarkable man, and his collection, well, it was quite the talk of St. Mary Mead. Clara's lips curved into a faint smile, though it did not reach her eyes. Thank you, Miss Marple. Henry's paintings were his life. I sometimes think he loved them more than— She paused, her gaze drifting to the portrait, then back to her hands. More than anything else. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle understanding. It must have been difficult, sharing him with such a passion. I've known men like that in the village collectors, you know, of stamps or rare books. They become quite consumed. Consumed, Clara echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, that's the word. Henry spent hours in that gallery, locked away with his treasures. I dined with him last night, as I always did, but he was distracted, talking of some new acquisition. He went to the gallery afterward, as he often did. I retired to my room by 10. Miss Marple tilted her head, her needles clicking softly as she resumed her knitting, a scarf of soft gray wool. And you heard nothing unusual? No sounds in the night? Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening in her lap. There was a noise. Perhaps, around midnight? A creak, or a thud. I thought it was the wind rattling the windows. This old house makes all sorts of sounds. She glanced at Miss Marple, then away, as if regretting the admission. Miss Marple's needles paused, though. Her face remained placid. The wind, yes. Old houses are full of character, aren't they? Though I've always found Vane Manor's walls rather solid. Sound doesn't carry easily here, does it? Clara's eyes flickered, a momentary unease crossing her features. I suppose not, she said quickly. I was half asleep. It was nothing, really. But Miss Marple was not so easily convinced. She had walked the manor's halls that morning, noting the thick stone walls and heavy oak doors, designed to muffle even the loudest disturbances. A thud at midnight suggested something more than a wayward breeze. She filed the thought away, her mind turning to the other occupants of the house. The drawing-room door opened, admitting Mr. Percival, the curator, who hovered uncertainly near the threshold. His wiry frame seemed taut with nervous energy, and his spectacles glinted as he adjusted them for the third time since entering. Mrs. Vane, I've catalogued the remaining pieces in the West Wing, he said, his voice clipped. The police have asked to see the inventory. Clara nodded, barely glancing at him. Thank you, Percival. Do whatever Inspector Craddock requires. Percival lingered, his eyes darting to Miss Marple. You're the lady from the village, aren't you? The one who helps with things. Miss Marple smiled, her expression as harmless as a summer breeze. I'm merely a neighbor. Mr. Percival, come to offer my sympathies, though I must say, your work here must be fascinating. Such a collection. The Vermeere, in particular, such a loss. Percival's face tightened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Yes, a tragedy. The Vermeere was Sir Henry's pride. I checked it myself yesterday evening, before locking the gallery at 10. Everything was in order. He hesitated, then added, I was in my office until late, working on the catalogue. Time-stamped, of course. Of course, Miss Marple said, her tone encouraging. Such meticulous work. You must have known Sir Henry's collection better than anyone. Percival straightened, a flicker of pride breaking through his unease. I like to think so. I've been with him for 15 years. Every painting, every frame, I know them all. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. And the dagger, the one used in this terrible business, was it part of the collection too? Percival's fingers froze on his spectacles. Yes, he said, after a moment. An Italian stiletto, 16th century, kept in a locked case in the gallery. Only Sir Henry and I had keys. I don't know how. His voice trailed off, and he looked away, his discomfort palpable. Miss Marple made a mental note of his reaction, her mind turning to the locked case. A key suggested access, and access suggested opportunity. But opportunity for whom? She glanced at Clara, who was staring into her teacup, her face unreadable. The widow's veil of grief, Miss Marple thought, might conceal more than sorrow. The door opened again, and Mr. Langston, the art dealer, swept in. His tailored suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to the room's somber mood. His smile was warm, almost too warm, and his eyes lingered on Clara before settling on Miss Marple. Miss Marple, is it? A pleasure, even under these grim circumstances. I'm Roger Langston, Sir Henry's dealer. Miss Marple inclined her head, noting the ease with which he filled the room. A pleasure, Mr. Langston. You must be devastated by Sir Henry's loss. I understand you worked closely with him. Very closely, Langston said, settling into a chair with the grace of a man accustomed to attention. Henry was a visionary. His collection was unmatched, though I dare say I helped him acquire a few gems. He flashed a smile, then sobered. I was here last night, discussing a potential sale. Left by 9, I'm afraid. A taxi took me to the station. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with interest. A sale. Of the Vermeere, perhaps. Langston's smile faltered, just for a moment. Not specifically, no. We were exploring options. Henry was particular about his paintings, you see. He rarely parted with them. Yet one is missing, Miss Marple said softly, her tone devoid of accusation. Curious, isn't it? Langston's eyes narrowed, but his smile returned, smooth as ever. Very curious, but I'm sure the police will get to the bottom of it. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking steadily. She had met men like Langston before, charming, ambitious, and perhaps a touch too clever. In St. Mary Mead, there had been a young man, a solicitor's clerk, who smiled just so, while embezzling funds. Charm, she knew, could mask a multitude of sins. The door opened once more, and Mr. Gibbs, the guard, entered, his broad frame filling the doorway. His face was a mask of stoicism, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Mrs. Vane, he said, his voice low and gravelly, the police are asking for me. I'll be in the hall if you need me. Clara waved a hand, her attention still on her teacup. Thank you, Gibbs. Miss Marple studied the guard, noting the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. He had the bearing of a man who had seen much and said little, a quality she had observed in the village's old gamekeeper, who knew every secret of the woods, but shared none. Mr. Gibbs, she said, her voice warm, you must have been vigilant last night, guarding such a valuable collection. Gibbs met her gaze, his expression unchanging. I did my rounds, ma'am. Saw nothing out of the ordinary. I was outside the gallery most of the night, except for a short walk around the perimeter at midnight. Midnight, Miss Marple repeated, her tone thoughtful. Just when Mrs. Vane heard that noise. How fortunate you were nearby. Gibbs' eyes flickered, but he said nothing, merely nodding before stepping out. Miss Marple's needles paused again, her mind turning over the guard's brief absence. A perimeter check at the precise moment of a crime was either terribly unlucky or terribly convenient. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple rose to take her leave, her condolence visit complete. Clara accompanied her to the door, her manner polite, but distant. You're very kind to call, Miss Marple, she said. I hope you'll come again. I shall, Miss Marple replied, her smile serene. And I do hope the police find that painting. It would be a shame to lose such beauty. As she walked down the gravel drive, the mist gathering once more, Miss Marple's thoughts were far from serene. Clara's vague noise, Percival's nervous precision, Langston's polished charm, and Gibbs' stoic silence each was a piece in a puzzle that refused to take shape. The locked gallery, the missing Vermeere, the antique dagger all pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of Vane Manor, but who? Back at her cottage, she settled by the fire, her knitting resumed. Cherry bustled in with more tea, eager for details, but Miss Marple offered only a vague smile. People are so like their houses, Cherry, she said, full of corners and shadows, hiding what they don't wish seen. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind worked, weaving the day's observations into a pattern. The widow's veil was a delicate thing, she thought, but beneath it lay a truth that would not stay hidden forever. Chapter 3. The Curator's Precision. The morning mist had burned away, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in a crisp autumn light that sharpened the outlines of Vane Manor's gabled roof. Miss Jane Marple, her black handbag tucked under her arm, made her way up the Manor's drive for the second time in as many days. Her condolence visit had planted seeds of curiosity, and now she returned under the guise of offering further support to Clara Vane. In truth, her keen mind was drawn to the gallery, where the mystery of Sir Henry's death and the missing Vermeere lay tangled like threads in a poorly knit scarf. Inspector Craddock met her at the door, his expression a mix of respect and mild exasperation. "Miss Marple, you're becoming a fixture here," he said, though his tone held no real reproach. "Mrs. Vane is resting, but Mr. Percival offered to show you the gallery again. He's been cooperative, if a bit jumpy." "Jumpy, Miss," Marple repeated, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "How interesting. I should like to see the gallery, Inspector. There's something about a place where a crime has occurred it speaks, if one knows how to listen." Craddock raised an eyebrow but led her through the Manor's echoing halls to the gallery. The air inside was cool, heavy with the scent of old wood and varnish. Mr. Percival awaited them, his wiry frame silhouetted against a towering canvas of a storm-tossed sea. His spectacles glinted as he turned, his hands fidgeting with a small notebook. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped but polite. "I didn't expect you back so soon." "Oh, I find art so soothing in times of grief," she replied, her tone as mild as milk. "And Sir Henry's collection is quite remarkable. I thought I might take a closer look, with your permission." Percival hesitated, then nodded, adjusting his spectacles with a nervous twitch. "Of course, I'll show you the main pieces." He began a brisk tour, pointing out a luminous Turner seascape, a brooding Goya portrait, and a delicate Watteau pastoral. His knowledge was encyclopedic, his descriptions precise. Yet Miss Marple noted a brittleness in his manner, as if each word were a step on thin ice. They reached the alcove where the Vermeere had hung, now a stark rectangle of faded wallpaper. "This is where it was," Percival said, his voice tightening. "The lady at the window. A masterpiece. I checked it myself at 10 last night, before locking the gallery. Everything was in order." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes tracing the empty space. "How meticulous you are, Mr. Percival. It must be a comfort to know your work is so thorough." She stepped closer, her gaze falling to a neighboring frame, a small Dutch still life, its flowers vivid against a dark background. There, on the lower edge, was a faint smudge, as if a careless hand had brushed against it. "Oh dear," she said, almost to herself. "Dust can be such a nuisance, can't it?" Percival followed her gaze, his face palling slightly. "The maids are usually diligent," he said quickly. "I'll speak to them." Miss Marple smiled, her expression as guileless as a child's. "No need to trouble them. Old houses are full of such little oversights." But her mind was far from dusting. The smudge suggested haste, perhaps someone moving through the gallery in the dark, their attention fixed not on art but on escape. She filed the observation away, her thoughts turning to the dagger. "Mr. Percival," she said, her voice gentle, "the dagger used in this terrible affair, it was kept in a case, wasn't it?" "Locked, I believe." He nodded, leading her to a glass-fronted case near the gallery's center. Inside, a collection of antique blades, gleamed rapiers, stilettos, a curved Ottoman dagger. The empty slot where the murder weapon had rested was conspicuous, its velvet lining slightly indented. "The Italian stiletto," Percival said, his voice low. "16th century, a fine piece. Only Sir Henry and I had keys to this case. I checked it last night, too. It was secure." Miss Marple peered at the case, noting the polished brass lock, its surface unmarred, save for a single faint scratch, barely visible in the light. "How curious," she murmured. "A locked case, yet the dagger was taken, and no sign of tampering, Inspector." Craddock, who had been observing silently, shook his head. None that we found. The lock's intact, and the key was on Sir Henry's chain, in his pocket when we found him. Miss Marple's needles, tucked into her bag, seemed to itch for movement, but she kept her hands still, her mind weaving. A locked case, a missing key, a smudged frame. Each was a piece of a puzzle, but the shape eluded her. She turned to Percival, her tone conversational. "You must have been very devoted to Sir Henry, working here so long. 15 years, wasn't it?" 16, Percival corrected, a touch of pride in his voice. "I started as his assistant, cataloging his early acquisitions. He trusted me with everything, the provenance, the restorations, the security measures. And last night, Miss Marple said, you were in your office, working on the catalogue." "Yes," Percival said, his fingers tightening on his notebook. "I have a log, time-stamped, to prove it. I was there until nearly midnight, then went to my quarters. I didn't hear anything unusual." Miss Marple nodded, her smile encouraging. "Such dedication. I imagine Sir Henry relied on you greatly." She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "Did you ever notice anyone lingering near the gallery after hours? Visitors, perhaps, or staff?" Percival's eyes darted to the side, a fleeting movement. "No one," he said too quickly. "The gallery was Sir Henry's sanctuary. Only he and I spent much time here." Miss Marple's smile didn't waver, but her mind noted the hesitation. In St. Mary Mead, she had known a shopkeeper, Mr. Tuttle, who spoke just so when hiding a small theft. Precision could be a mask, she thought, as much as charm or silence. She thanked Percival and moved toward a window, pretending to admire the view of the manor's gardens. Now tinged with the first frost, Craddock joined her, lowering his voice. "You're fishing, Miss Marple. What's caught your eye?" "Nothing yet," she replied, her tone light. "But I find Mr. Percival's precision illuminating. A man so careful with his work might notice more than he says." Craddock frowned, glancing at Percival, who was now rearranging papers at a small desk. "You think he's hiding something?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "that people often hide what they fear to lose. A job, a reputation, a secret. We shall see." As they left the gallery, Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the smudged frame and the scratched lock. She thought of the village school teacher, Miss Hartnell, who had once overlooked a boy's truancy because he was her nephew. Loyalty, like precision, could blind as much as it revealed. Percival's devotion to Sir Henry was clear, but was it to the man or to the collection? And if the latter, what might he do to protect it or to gain from it? Back in the drawing room, Clara Vane had reappeared, her face still pale but composed. She offered Miss Marple more tea, which was declined with a polite smile. "I mustn't impose," Miss Marple said, "but I wonder, Mrs. Vane, if you've remembered anything more about that noise you heard. It might help the inspector." Clara's hands tightened on her cup, the porcelain clinking softly. "I've told you, it was nothing, just the house settling, or the wind. I was half asleep." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "Memory can be so tricky, can't it? Like a painting, it fades unless you look closely." She rose, gathering her bag. "I'll call again soon, my dear. You must take care." As she stepped into the crisp air, Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities. Percival's nervous precision, the smudged frame, the scratched lock all pointed to a careful plan, disrupted by an unexpected encounter. She thought of the Vermeere, its absence, a silent accusation. Someone had wanted it badly enough to kill, and Percival, with his key and his catalogue, was closer to the heart of the matter than he admitted. Walking back to St. Mary Mead, her shawl drawn against the chill, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle taking shape. The curator's precision was a thread worth following, and She would tug at it gently, as she always did, until the truth unraveled. Chapter 4. The dealer's charm. The high street of St. Mary Mead hummed with its usual quiet bustle as Miss Jane Marple made her way toward the post office, her black handbag swinging gently at her side. The autumn air was sharp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and chimney smoke, and the village seemed to whisper its secrets in the rustle of hedgerows. Her visit to Vane Manor the previous day had left her with a tapestry of impressions: Clara's guarded sorrow, Percival's nervous precision, and the stoic silence of Gibbs. But it was Mr. Roger Langston, the art dealer, whose polished charm had caught her attention most keenly. Charm, she knew from long experience, was often a veneer, and beneath it might lie the key to Sir Henry Vane's murder at the post office. Mrs. Baker, the postmistress, greeted her with a knowing nod, her eyes bright with the village's latest gossip. "Miss Marple, you've been up at the manor, haven't you? Terrible business, Sir Henry. They say a painting's gone missing, to a fortune it was worth." Mrs. Baker leaned across the counter, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And that Mr. Langston, the dealer, was seen in the village yesterday, all smiles, as if nothing's happened. I heard he's got debts, mind you. Mr. Tuttle at the grocer's says he's been dodging bills." Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile, though her mind was already at work. "Debts, you say? How interesting. Mr. Langston does seem a man of expensive tastes." She purchased a few stamps, tucking them into her bag, and added, "I suppose he was a frequent visitor to the manor." "Oh, aye," Mrs. Baker said, eager to share. "Always coming and going, him and his fancy. Last week, I saw him talking to a stranger near the church, a foreign-looking gentleman, all in black. Looked like business, if you ask me." Miss Marple nodded, her expression as placid as ever. "Business, indeed. Thank you, Mrs. Baker. You're always so observant." As she stepped back into the street, her thoughts turned to Langston. A dealer with debts, a missing painting, a mysterious stranger. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern. Though it was still as elusive as a half-remembered dream, she decided to return to Vane Manor, ostensibly to check on Clara Vane, but with the intention of speaking to Langston. The manor's gravel drive crunched under her sensible shoes, and she was met at the door by a young constable, who ushered her into the drawing-room. Clara was absent, resting upstairs, but Mr. Langston was there, lounging in a velvet armchair, a glass of sherry in his hand. His tailored suit was impeccable, his dark hair sleekly combed, and his smile, when he saw her, was as warm as a summer afternoon. "Miss Marple, what a delight," he said, rising with a grace that seemed almost rehearsed. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Come to admire the manor's charms, or are you playing detective?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her feet. "Oh, merely a neighborly visit, Mr. Langston," she said, her voice soft and disarming. "Though I must say, I'm fascinated by your work. Dealing in art must be terribly exciting, such beauty, such value." Langston's eyes gleamed, and he leaned forward, his charm as polished as the manor's silver. "It's a passion, Miss Marple. Finding a masterpiece, matching it with the right buyer, it's like orchestrating a symphony. Sir Henry was a collector of rare taste, and I was privileged to help him build his collection." "How fortunate he was to have you," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking as she began a new row of her scarf. "And the Vermeere, the one that's gone missing, was that one of your finds?" Langston's smile tightened, just for a moment, before smoothing out again. "Indeed it was. I sourced it from a private estate in Amsterdam, years ago. Henry paid a pretty penny, but it was worth every shilling. A tragedy it's gone." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes bright with interest. "I imagine such a painting would have many admirers. Buyers, perhaps, who were eager to acquire it." Langston sipped his sherry, his movements deliberate. "Oh, certainly. The Vermeere was coveted by collectors across Europe. I had an inquiry just last month, a gentleman from Paris, offering a substantial sum. Henry wouldn't hear of selling, though he was attached to his paintings, almost like children. Almost, Miss Marple echoed, her tone thoughtful. Yet someone took it, and poor Sir Henry paid the price. You were here that night, weren't you? Discussing a sale, I believe. Langston nodded, his expression somber. Yes, I met Henry in his study at 8. We talked about a potential acquisition, a small Renoir, nothing on the scale of the Vermeere. I left by 9, caught a taxi to the station. The driver can confirm it. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze resting on him. How convenient, a taxi receipt. I suppose you've kept it. Of course, Langston said, patting his jacket pocket. The police have it now. I'm nothing if not thorough. Miss Marple, she smiled, her expression as harmless as a village fete. I'm sure you are. Though I wondered, did you see anyone else that evening? Mr. Percival, perhaps, or Mr. Gibbs? Langston shook his head, his smile unwavering. No one. The manor was quiet when I left. Gibbs was at his post outside, I suppose, but I didn't see him. Percival was probably buried in his catalogue, as usual. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing his words. His alibi was neat, almost too neat, like a painting hung just so, to hide a crack in the wall. She thought of Mrs. Baker's gossip, this stranger near the church, Langston's debts. A man with financial troubles and a priceless painting within reach might be tempted to bend the rules of his trade. The door opened, and Inspector Craddock entered, his face lined with fatigue. Miss Marple, still here? I've just been through Percival's logs, solid as a rock. He was in his office until midnight, time-stamped entries and all. How reassuring, Miss Marple said, though her tone held a hint of something else. And Mr. Langston's taxi receipt? Checks out, Craddock said, glancing at the dealer. Driver remembers him, dropped him at the station at 9:15. Langston spread his hands, his smile almost triumphant. As I said, Inspector, I'm an open book. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her eyes drifting to the portrait of Clara Vane above the mantel. Open books are the easiest to read, Mr. Langston, she said softly. But sometimes, the most important words are written between the lines. Craddock raised an eyebrow, but Langston merely chuckled, raising his glass in a mock toast. You're a poet, Miss Marple. If you ever tire of knitting, you should try your hand at detective work. She smiled, her expression serene, but her mind was far from idle. As she rose to leave, she paused by the window, her gaze falling on the manor's gardens, where a faint path led to a side gate. Such a lovely view, she said, though I imagine it's quite dark at night. Easy to come and go unseen, perhaps. Langston's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed slightly. I wouldn't know, Miss Marple. I'm not one for skulking about in the dark. Of course not, she said, her tone as warm as ever. Thank you for indulging an old woman's curiosity, Mr. Langston. I'll call again to see Mrs. Vane. As she walked back to St. Mary Mead, the village settling into the golden hush of late afternoon, Miss Marple's thoughts were alive with possibilities. Langston's charm was a carefully crafted facade. She was certain, like the polished surface of a counterfeit coin. His alibi was solid, but alibis could be arranged, just as paintings could be stolen. The stranger Mrs. Baker had seen, the whispers of debt. The missing Vermeere pointed to a man who knew the value of beauty and the price of ambition. At her cottage, she settled by the fire, her knitting in her lap. Cherry bustled in, eager for news, but Miss Marple offered only a vague smile. People are so like their professions, Cherry, she said. A dealer trades in trust, but trust can be a fragile thing. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind wove the day's threads into a pattern. Langston's charm was a thread worth pulling, and she would tug gently, as she always did, until the truth came loose. Chapter 5. The guards silenced. The late afternoon sun dipped low over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of amber and gold, but a chill lingered in the air, as if the shadow of Sir Henry Vane's murder clung to the very stones of Vane Manor. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl drawn tightly against the breeze, walked the familiar path to the manor, her mind a quiet whirl of observations. The charm of Mr. Langston, the nervous precision of Mr. Percival, and the veiled sorrow of Clara Vane had each added threads to the tapestry of the crime. But it was Mr. Gibbs, the guard, whose stoic silence intrigued her most today. Silence, she knew from long experience in St. Mary Mead, could speak louder than words, and she intended to listen at the manor. The young constable at the door recognized her and waved her through with a respectful nod. The hall was quiet, the air heavy, with the scent of beeswax and old wood, and Miss Marple found Inspector Craddock in the library, poring over a stack of papers. His face, lined with the strain of the investigation, brightened slightly at her arrival. "Miss Marple," he said, pushing aside a notebook, "you're back again. I'm beginning to think you're as much a detective as I am." "Oh, nonsense, Inspector," she replied, her smile as gentle as a summer breeze. "I'm merely here to offer a bit of comfort to Mrs. Vane, though I thought I might have a word with Mr. Gibbs, if he's about." A guard's perspective must be so valuable in a place like this. Craddock's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "Gibbs is outside, checking the grounds. I'll have him brought in. He's been cooperative, but tight-lipped. Says he saw nothing." The night of the murder. People often see more than they realize, Miss Marple said, her tone thoughtful. "Or less than they claim." Craddock sent a constable to fetch Gibbs, and Miss Marple settled into a leather armchair, her knitting bag at her feet. The library was a grand room, its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, but her eyes were drawn to a small window overlooking the manor's side gate, a discreet exit, half hidden by ivy. She made a mental note of it, recalling Lang's casual dismissal of skulking in the dark. A guard, she thought, would know every such path. Mr. Gibbs entered, his broad frame filling the doorway. He was a man of middle age, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. His uniform, though neatly pressed, bore faint creases, as if he had worn it through a long night. He stood at attention, his hands clasped behind his back, and regarded Miss Marple with a nod. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like stones shifting in a riverbed. Double quotes, "Mr. Gibbs." Miss Marple began, her voice warm and inviting. "I do hope I'm not troubling you. I was just thinking how vital your role must be, guarding such treasures. Sir Henry must have trusted you implicitly." Gibbs inclined his head, his expression unchanging. 10 years I've worked for him, ma'am. Never a problem until now." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she drew them from her bag, beginning a new row of her scarf. 10 years is a long time," she said. "You must know the manor better than most. Every door, every window, every shadow." "I do my rounds," Gibbs said, his tone even, inside and out. "The gallery's my main post, but I check the grounds, too. Keeps things secure." "And the night of the murder?" she asked, her eyes fixed on her knitting, though her attention was wholly on him. "You were at your post, I presume?" "Most of the night," Gibbs said. "Outside the gallery door, as usual. Took a walk around the perimeter at midnight, like I always do. Back in 10 minutes. Saw nothing, heard nothing." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze lifting to meet his. 10 minutes, she said, softly. "Such a short time, yet so much can happen." Mrs. Vane mentioned a noise around midnight, a thud. "Perhaps you didn't hear it." Gibbs' eyes flickered, a momentary crack in his stoic facade. "No, ma'am. The wind was up that night. Could have been a branch, or the house settling. I was out by the west gate when it would have happened. The west gate, Miss Marple repeated, her tone as mild as ever. Near the gardens, isn't it? Such a quiet spot. She recalled the side gate she had noticed from the library window, its path barely worn, as if used only by those who preferred not to be seen. You must have a keen eye, Mr. Gibbs, to notice anything amiss in the dark. I do my job, he said, his voice flat. If someone got in, they didn't come through the grounds. Not on my watch. Miss Marple nodded, her smile encouraging. Of course. You're a man of duty, Mr. Gibbs. I've known men like you in St. Mary, reliable, steady. Like old Mr. Hodge, our gamekeeper, who could spot a poacher's track. In a storm, she paused, then added, Did you see Mr. Langston that evening, before he left? Gibbs hesitated, his hands shifting slightly behind his back. Saw him leave the study around 9, headed for the front door. Didn't see him after that. And Mr. Percival, or Mrs. Vane? She asked, her needles resuming their rhythm. Percival was in his office, far as I know. Mrs. Vane was upstairs. Didn't see either of them after dinner. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with interest. How very clear. You're a man who notices things, Mr. Gibbs, even if you don't always say so. He met her gaze, his expression unyielding. I say what needs saying, ma'am. As Gibbs excused himself to resume his duties, Miss Marple turned to Craddock, who had been listening quietly. A man of few words, she said, her tone thoughtful. But silence can be as telling as speech, don't you think? Craddock frowned, glancing at the door through which Gibbs had disappeared. You think he's holding something back? I think, Miss Marple said, that a guard who leaves his post at the precise moment of a crime is either unlucky, or something else entirely. Shall we take a look at the gallery door? I'd like to see where Mr. Gibbs stood. Craddock led her to the gallery, its heavy oak door looming at the end of a shadowed corridor. The lock was sturdy, its brass gleaming, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught a faint scratch near the keyhole, a hairline mark that might have been overlooked by a less attentive observer. Oh dear, she said, leaning closer. This lock has seen some wear, hasn't it? Craddock peered at it, his brow furrowing. Could be old damage. We didn't find any signs of forced entry, but I'll have the boys take another look. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the village blacksmith, Mr. Sims, who had once repaired a lock for her cottage. He'd shown her how a skilled hand could pick even the sturdiest mechanism with the right tools. A guard, she thought, would know the manor's locks as well as its shadows. She stepped back, her gaze sweeping the corridor, noting a small window. At its end, partially obscured by a tapestry, such a drafty spot, she said. I imagine it's quite dark at night. Pitch black, Craddock admitted. Gibbs would have had a lantern, but it's not much against the shadows. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. Shadows hide so much, don't they? Like secrets, they only reveal themselves when the light is just right. As they returned to the library, Miss Marple's thoughts were alive with possibilities. Gibbs' silence was a wall, but walls had cracks, and she had seen one in his fleeting hesitation. His absence at midnight, the scratched lock, the quiet path by the west gate all suggested a moment of opportunity. Whether for Gibbs himself or someone he might have seen and chosen not to name. She thought of a gardener in St. Mary Mead, Mr. Pratt, who had once turned a blind eye to a poacher for a share of the spoils. Loyalty, she knew, could be bought, or it could blind. Craddock offered to escort her back to the village, but she declined, preferring the walk to clear her mind. You're a marvel, Miss Marple, he said, half in jest. If I didn't know better, I'd say you're solving this case single-handed. Oh, Inspector, she replied, her smile serene, I'm just an old woman who notices things. The truth has a way of coming out. like a stitch that's been dropped. As she walked down the manor's drive, the sun sinking behind the hills, Miss Marple's mind wove the day's threads into a pattern. Gibbs' silence was a thread worth tugging, and she would pull gently, as she always did, until the fabric of the crime began to unravel. Chapter 6. The threads unraveled. Evening shadows stretched long across St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a hush broken only by the distant bark of a dog and the soft tolling of the church bell. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage fireside, the glow casting a warm light on her knitting, a soft gray scarf that grew steadily under her deft fingers. The events at Vane Manor swirled in her mind like leaves in an autumn gust. Clara's veiled sorrow, Percival's nervous precision, Langston's polished charm, and Gibbs' stoic silence. Each was a thread in the tapestry of Sir Henry Vane's murder, but the pattern remained elusive, like a melody heard faintly in the distance. Tonight, she resolved to weave those threads closer, letting her thoughts drift as the fire crackled. Cherry, her maid, bustled in with a tray of tea and scones, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Any news from the manor, Miss Marple?" she asked, setting the tray on the table. "The village is all abuzz about that missing painting. They say it's worth more than the manor itself." Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile as she poured her tea. "Gossip does travel fast, Cherry, but it's the quiet details that matter most. Like a dropped stitch, they're easy to miss unless you look closely." She sipped her tea, her mind turning over the clues she had gathered: the smudged frame in the gallery, the scratched lock on the dagger's case, the faint mark on the gallery door, and Gibbs' absence at midnight. Each pointed to a careful plan disrupted by an unexpected moment. But whose plan, and whose moment? She thought of the Vermeere, the lady at the window, its absence a gaping hole in the gallery's splendor. A painting so valuable would tempt many, but only someone with access could have taken and killed Sir Henry to do so. Clara's mention of a midnight noise, Percival's meticulous alibi, Langston's convenient taxi receipt, and Gibbs' brief absence formed a circle of suspicion, but the center remained unclear. Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically, her thoughts as precise as her stitches. "People are so like their roles," she murmured to herself. "A wife, a curator, a dealer, a guard, each has a part to play, but sometimes the script changes." Her mind drifted to a case in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a trusted butler, Mr. Grayson, had stolen silver from his employer, claiming loyalty while pocketing the profits. The betrayal had been uncovered by a single misplaced candlestick, noticed by a housemaid. Small details, Miss Marple knew, could unravel great deceptions. She resolved to return to the manor tomorrow, but first, she would seek out the village's eyes and ears. The next morning, after a breakfast of toast and marmalade, Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and set out for the village shop. The air was crisp, the sky a pale blue streaked with wisps of cloud, and the high street hummed with early activity. At the shop, Mr. Tuttle, the grocer, greeted her with a nod, his apron dusted with flour. "Morning, Miss Marple. Come for your usual, or is it manor business?" His tone was teasing, but his eyes were keen, eager for a tidbit to share. "Just a bit of tea, Mr. Tuttle," she replied, her smile disarming. "Though I hear you've had some interesting customers lately. Mr. Langston, perhaps?" Tuttle's face lit up, as she had known it would. "Aye, that he has been. Always in a rush, that one, buying cigars and fancy chocolates. But he's been short on payments lately. Owes me for a month's worth of goods. And last week I saw him at the pub with a stranger, all hushed like. Foreign chap, dark coat, looked like he meant business." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "How observant you are, Mr. Tuttle. Near the church, was it? Mrs. Baker mentioned something similar." Tuttle nodded, leaning closer. "Right by the lich gate, it was." They were talking low, and Langston looked nervous, kept glancing about, like he didn't want to be seen. "Thank you, Mr. Tuttle," Miss Marple said, tucking her tea into her bag. "You've a knack for noticing things." As she left the shop, her mind turned over this new thread. A stranger, a clandestine meeting. Langston's detsities were not mere gossip but pieces of a larger design. She recalled a young man in the village, Tommy Pierce, who had once planned a theft with an outsider, only to be caught by a neighbor's sharp eyes. Outsiders, she thought, often needed insiders to succeed. At Vane Manor, Miss Marple was met by Inspector Craddock, who looked more haggard than the day before. "You're relentless, Miss Marple," he said, though his tone held a grudging admiration. "We've been over the gallery again, nothing new, I'm afraid. The lock on the door is clean, save for that scratch you pointed out. Could be old, but we're testing it for fresh marks." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "Every detail matters, Inspector. Might I speak with Mr. Gibbs again? I've been thinking about his rounds." Craddock raised an eyebrow but sent for Gibbs, who appeared promptly, his face as impassive as ever. "Ma'am," he said, standing at attention, "you've more questions." "Just a few, Mr. Gibbs," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. "I was wondering about your perimeter check at midnight. You said you were by the west gate. Did you notice anything unusual there? A footprint, perhaps, or a gate left ajar?" Gibbs' eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Nothing out of place. Gate was locked, grounds were clear. I'd have noticed anything odd." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly. "You're so thorough. Though I wonder, did you see Mr. Langston at all, after he left the study, or anyone else near the gallery?" "No one," Gibbs said, his tone firm. "The manor was quiet. I'd have seen anyone coming or going." Miss Marple smiled, her gaze drifting to the window, where the west gate was just visible through the trees. How reassuring. "A guard's eyes are never idle, are they?" She paused, then added, "Though even the sharpest eyes can miss a shadow if it moves quickly." Gibbs said nothing, his silence as heavy as the manor's walls. Miss Marple thanked him and turned to Craddock, who was watching her closely. "You're digging, Miss Marple," he said quietly. "What's on your mind?" "Nothing certain," she replied, her tone light. "But I find it curious that so many alibis align so neatly. Like a row of stitches, they look perfect until you tug." She rose, gathering her bag. "I'll call again tomorrow, Inspector. Mrs. Vane may need a friend." As she walked back to the village, the sun climbing higher, Miss Marple's thoughts were a quiet storm. The smudged frame, the scratched lock, Gibbs' absence, Langston's stranger, all were threads, but the needle was the motive. The value was clear, but why kill for it? She thought of Clara's resentment, Percival's devotion, Langston's ambition, and Gibbs' loyalty. Each could have wanted the painting, but only one had acted at her cottage. She settled by the fire, her knitting in her lap. Cherry hovered, but Miss Marple waved her off with a smile. "The truth is like a skein of wool, Cherry," she said. "Tangled at first, but with patience, it unravels." As the fire glowed, she tugged at the threads in her mind, knowing that one would lead her to the heart of the crime. Chapter 7. A Hidden Truth. The morning air in St. Mary Mead carried a brisk edge, the kind that sharpened the senses and quickened the step. Miss Jane Marple, her tweed coat buttoned against the chill, walked purposefully toward Vane Manor, her black handbag a familiar weight at her side. The village was stirring, with the milkman's cart rattling along the high street and the scent of fresh bread wafting from the bakery. Yet her thoughts were fixed on the manor, where the threads of Sir Henry Vane's murder were beginning to form a pattern, faint but discernible, like the outline of a figure in a fog. The smudged frame, the scratched lock, Gibbs' absence, and Langston's whispered meeting with a stranger, all were clues. But it was the gallery itself that called her back, its shadows holding secrets yet to be uncovered. At the manor, Inspector Craddock greeted her in the hall, his face etched with the weariness of a man grappling with an elusive truth. "Miss Marple, you're as predictable as the sunrise," he said, though his tone held a warmth that belied his words. "We've had a development. A drop of blood, not Sir Henry's, found near the gallery's back door. It's being tested now, but it suggests the killer might have been injured." Miss Marple's eyes brightened behind her spectacles, though her expression remained serene. "How intriguing, Inspector. A struggle, perhaps, or a careless moment in flight." She paused, her mind turning over the new clue like a coin. "Might I see the back door? I find these little details so illuminating." Craddock led her through the manor's labyrinthine corridors to the gallery's rear entrance, a narrow door tucked behind a heavy tapestry. The door was sturdy oak, its lock similar to the one at the main entrance, but here too, Miss Marple noted a faint scratch, almost invisible in the dim light. Nearby, on the polished floor, a small chalk circle marked where the blood had been found, a single drop, dark against the wood. She bent closer, her shawl slipping slightly, and studied the surrounding area. A faint trail of disturbed dust led from the door to a corner where a storage room was concealed behind a panel. "Curious," she murmured, straightening. "This door is so discreet. One might come and go unnoticed, especially at night." Craddock nodded, his brow furrowed. "We're checking for fingerprints, but the dust suggests no one's used this entrance in weeks. The blood's the odd part, it doesn't match Sir Henry's, and none of the staff reported injuries." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "People are often reluctant to admit their wounds, Inspector, physical or otherwise." She gestured to the storage room. "Might we look inside? I've a feeling it's been overlooked." Pushed open the panel, revealing a cramped space filled with crates, rolled canvases, and cleaning supplies. The air was thick with the scent of linseed oil and turpentine. Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned the shelves, landing on a folded cloth tucked behind a crate. She pointed to it, her tone gentle. "That cloth, Inspector, might it be worth a look?" Craddock retrieved it, unfolding a plain cotton rag stained with a faint smear of what looked like paint thinner, its sharp odor cutting through the musty air. "Odd place for this," he said, turning it over. "The maids don't store cleaning supplies here." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. "Paint thinner," she said softly. "I recall Mr. Percival mentioning that Vermeere's frame was treated with a similar chemical for restoration. Perhaps someone used it to clean more than a frame." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "You think the killer tried to erase evidence?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "that people are careless when they're hurried. A drop of blood, a smudged frame, a cloth left behind, these are the mistakes of haste." She thought of a village seamstress, Mrs. Finch, who had once hidden a stolen brooch in her sewing basket, only to be betrayed by a stray thread. Small oversights, she knew, could unravel grand schemes. Back in the drawing room, Miss Marple requested to speak with Mr. Percival, whose nervous energy seemed to have intensified since her last visit. He entered, clutching his notebook, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped, "I'm rather busy with the police inventory. Is this urgent?" "Oh, not urgent at all," she replied, settling into a chair with her knitting. "I was just thinking about the gallery's security. You're so meticulous, Mr. Percival. It must be distressing to know someone breached it." Percival adjusted his spectacles, his fingers trembling slightly. "It's unthinkable," he said. "I locked the gallery at 10, as always. The dagger's case was secure. I checked it myself. I was in my office until midnight, working on the catalogue. The log proves it." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her eyes on her scarf, but her attention on him. "Such dedication," she said. "Though I wonder, did you see anyone near the gallery that evening?" "Mr. Langston, perhaps. He mentioned leaving at 9, but sometimes people linger." Percival's face tightened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. I did see him, he admitted, his voice low. He was near the gallery door. After his meeting with Sir Henry, I thought he was just admiring the paintings, but he shouldn't have been there. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to cause trouble. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze lifting to meet his. How thoughtful of you, she said, though it's curious, isn't it, that a man with an alibi would linger in a place he claimed to have left. Percival looked away, his hands fidgeting with his notebook. I suppose so. I was focused on my work. I didn't think it mattered. Of course, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. But little things often matter, don't they? Like a smudge on a frame, or a drop of blood. She watched his reaction, noting the faint flush that crept up his neck. You've been so helpful, Mr. Percival. I won't keep you. As he hurried out, Miss Marple turned to Craddock, who had been listening silently. He's nervous, Craddock said, but his log checks out. Time-stamped entries, every half hour. He was in his office. Logs can be written in advance, Miss Marple said softly, or altered after. In St. Mary Mead, a shopkeeper once backdated his ledger to hide a theft. Precision is a wonderful thing, Inspector, until it's used to deceive. Craddock frowned, rubbing his chin. You're suggesting Percival's involved. I'm suggesting, she said, that loyalty can blind as much as it binds. Mr. Percival saw Mr. Langston, but said nothing. Why? Fear of trouble, or fear of something else? She rose, gathering her bag, and glanced at the portrait of Clara Vane above the mantel. Its painted eyes seemed to watch her, as if guarding a secret of their own. I'll call again tomorrow, Inspector, she said. Mrs. Vane may need cheering. As she walked back to the village, the sky darkening with the promise of rain, Miss Marple's thoughts were a quiet whirl. The drop of blood, the paint thinner, Percival's reluctant admissional were new threads, tightening the weave. Langston's presence near the gallery, Gibbs' absence at midnight, Clara's vague noise, these were not coincidences, but connections. She thought of a village carpenter, Mr. Reed, who had once hidden a stolen watch in his workshop, only to be betrayed by a speck of sawdust. The truth, she knew, lay in such small betrayals. At her cottage, she settled by the fire, her knitting in her lap. Cherry hovered, eager for news, but Miss Marple offered only a smile. The truth is like a hidden stitch, Cherry, she said. You don't see it until you pull the right thread. As the fire glowed, she tugged at the threads. In her mind, knowing that one would lead her closer to the heart of the crime. Chapter 8. The dealer's gambit. The morning broke over St. Mary Mead with a pale, watery sun that did little to warm the chill seeping through the village. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl snug about her shoulders, sat at her breakfast table, a cup of tea steaming gently before her. The events at Vane Manor weighed on her mind, each clue a knot in the skein of wool she was unraveling. The drop of blood by the gallery's back door, the paint thinner stained cloth, Percival's reluctant admission about Langston's lingering presence, these were threads, and they pointed increasingly toward Roger Langston, the art dealer, whose charm was as polished as the manor's silver, but perhaps just as tarnished. Today, she resolved to tug at that thread, to see how far it would unravel. As she sipped her tea, Cherry bustled in, her apron slightly askew, her eyes alight with the village's latest whispers. Miss Marple, they're saying at the bakery that Mr. Langston's been seen in London, meeting with some fancy art types. Mrs. Tuttle swears he's up to no good, selling off Sir Henry's paintings on the sly. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, her needles clicking softly as she resumed her knitting. Gossip is like a breeze, Chariot carries seeds, but only some take root. Mr. Langston is a man who likes to be seen, isn't he? But it's what he does in the shadows that interests me. She set her knitting aside, her mind already tracing the path back to Vane Manor. Langston's charm, his debts, his meeting with a stranger, all suggested a man with motive and opportunity. But motive for what? Theft, certainly, but murder. At the manor, Miss Marple was met by Inspector Craddock, who looked as though he had not slept since their last meeting. His tie was slightly loosened, a rare lapse in his usual neatness. "Miss Marple," he said, ushering her into the drawing room, "you're a glutton for punishment. We've got a new lead." Langston's taxi driver confirmed his story, but we found something odd in his office in London. A set of lock-picking tools, hidden in a drawer. Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained serene. "Lock-picking tools," she said softly. "How very modern. And yet the gallery lock showed only a faint scratch, didn't it?" Craddock nodded, rubbing his chin. "Barely noticeable. Could be old, but we're testing it. And that blood, by the back door, it's being analyzed, but no matches yet among the staff." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her feet. "A scratch, a drop of blood, a hidden cloths, small things, Inspector, but they tell a story. I'd like to speak with Mr. Langston, if he's here. His perspective might be illuminating." Craddock sent a constable to fetch the dealer, and Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the portrait of Clara Vane above the mantel, its painted eyes seeming to follow her. The widow had been absent today, resting, but her presence lingered in the room's heavy silence. Miss Marple thought of a village widow, Mrs. Lyle, who had worn her grief like a mask while secretly selling her husband's heirlooms. Grief, she knew, could conceal as much as it revealed. Roger Langston entered, his tailored suit as impeccable as ever, his smile a touch too bright for a house of mourning. "Miss Marple, always a pleasure," he said, settling into a chair, with the ease of a man accustomed to command. "I hear you're turning detective. Any theories about poor Henry's demise?" "Oh, I'm no detective, Mr. Langston," Miss Marple said, her tone mild as she drew her needles from her bag. "Just an old woman who notices things. Like your interest in the Vermeere, for instance. Such a valuable painting must have tempted many buyers." Langston's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "It did. I told you about the Parisian collector offered a fortune, but Henry wouldn't budge. Art is passion, Miss Marple, not just profit." "Of course," she said, her needles clicking rhythmically. "Though passion can lead to desperate acts, can't it? I was wondering about that evening you were here. You left at 9, you said, but Mr. Percival saw you near the gallery. An odd place to linger, for a man on his way to a taxi." Langston's fingers tightened on the arm of his chair, a fleeting gesture. "Percival must be mistaken," he said. "Smoothly I left straight from the study. The gallery's tempting, I admit, but I had a train to catch." Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze steady but gentle. "And yet, mistakes happen. Like leaving a cloth with paint thinner in the storage room, or a drop of blood by the back door. Or perhaps a lock picked with a tool you know well." Langston's smile faltered, and for a moment his charm seemed to crack, like varnish on an old canvas. "Paint thinner is common in art restoration," he said, his voice cool. "As for blood, I cut my hand on a glass last week. Nothing sinister. You're reaching, Miss Marple." "Am I?" she said, her tone as soft as a whisper. "In St. Mary Mead, a young man once claimed a cut from a broken bottle, but it was a knife he'd used to pry open a safe. Small wounds tell big stories, Mr. Langston." Craddock, who had been listening silently, leaned forward. "We found tools in your office, Langston. Care to explain?" Langston's composure held, but his eyes darted to the door. "Tools of the trade," he said. "I deal with old frames, locks on crates. You'd be surprised how often a pick comes in handy. Perfectly legal." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze resting on him. "Legal, perhaps, but convenient too, for a man who knows a painting's worth and a lock's weakness. That Parisian buyer, did he press you to acquire the Vermeere, no matter the cost? Langston's smile returned, but it was strained. You're weaving quite a tale, Miss Marple. I'm a businessman, not a thief. My taxi receipt proves I left at 9, asked the driver. We have, Craddock said, his voice sharp. But receipts can be arranged, and 10 minutes is a long time in a dark manor. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. Time is so slippery, isn't it? Like a shadow moving past a guard's lantern. She thought of Gibbs' absence at midnight, Percival's nervous admission, and the stranger in the village. Langston's charm was a shield, but it was beginning to dent. As she rose to leave, she paused by the window, her gaze falling on the west gate, its path barely visible through the trees. Such a quiet spot, she said. A man could slip through unnoticed, if he knew the way. Langston's eyes followed hers, but he said nothing, his silence as telling as Gibbs. Miss Marple thanked him and turned to Craddock. I'll call again tomorrow, Inspector. Mrs. Vane may need a kind word. As she walked back to St. Mary Mead, the sky heavy with the threat of rain, Miss Marple's thoughts were a quiet whirl. Langston's tools, his lingering near the gallery, the blood by the door, all pointed to a man whose ambition outstripped his alibi. She thought of a village jeweler, Mr. Cobb, who had once forged a receipt to cover a theft, only to be undone by a witness who saw him linger too long. The truth, she knew, was close, hidden in the cracks of Langston's charm. At her cottage, she settled by the fire, her knitting in her lap. Cherry hovered, but Miss Marple waved her off with a smile. The truth is like a painting, Cherry, she said. It's there, but you must step back to see it clearly. As the fire glowed, she tugged at the threads in her mind, certain that Langston's gambit was the key to unraveling the crime. Chapter 9. The Confession. The sky over St. Mary Mead hung low and grey, heavy with the promise of rain, as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Vane Manor for what she sensed would be her final visit in this grim affair. Her black handbag swung lightly at her side, her steps measured but resolute, as if each crunch of gravel on the manor's drive brought her closer to the truth. The threads of Sir Henry Vane's murder, the smudged frame, the scratched lock, the drop of blood, the paint-thinner stained cloth, and Roger Langston's too perfect charm had woven a pattern in her mind, clear at last, like a tapestry brought into focus by the right light. Today, she would pull the final thread and lay the truth bare, in the manor's drawing room. The air was thick with tension, as if the very walls sensed the approaching resolution. Inspector Craddock had gathered the suspects at Miss Marple's quiet suggestion, his face a mix of skepticism and anticipation. Clara Vane sat by the window, her black dress stark against her pale skin, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Mr. Percival stood near the fireplace, his spectacles glinting as he adjusted them nervously. Mr. Gibbs loomed by the door, his broad frame as still as a statue, his eyes fixed on some unseen point. And Roger Langston, ever the picture of composure, lounged in an armchair, though his smile was a shade less confident than before. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her feet, her needles idle for the moment. She surveyed the room, her mild blue eyes taking in each face, each telltale flicker of emotion. "Thank you all for indulging an old woman," she began, her voice soft and measured, as if discussing the weather at a village fete. "I've been thinking about poor Sir Henry and his beautiful Vermeere. Such a tragedy, to lose both a man and a masterpiece. But I believe we can find the truth, if we look closely at the little things." Craddock, standing by the mantel, cleared his throat. "Miss Marple has been helpful in our inquiries," he said, his tone diplomatic. "She's asked to share her thoughts. I'd like you all to listen." Clara's eyes flicked to Miss Marple, a spark of unease in their depths. Percival's fingers tightened on his notebook. Gibbs remained impassive, but Langston leaned forward, his smile thin. "By all means, Miss Marple, he said. Enlighten us. Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile, her hands resting calmly in her lap. It's the small things, you see, that tell the story. A smudge on a frame, a scratch on a lock, a drop of blood by a door, a cloth with paint thinner. These are not accidents, but signs of a plan gone awry. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. Sir Henry was killed in his gallery, stabbed with a dagger from a locked case. The Vermeere was taken, but not by chance. Someone wanted it badly enough to kill, and that someone was here that night. Clara's hands twitched, her voice sharp. You're not suggesting one of us? Oh, my dear, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. I'm only piecing together what the manor has told us. Let's begin with the gallery. It was locked, Mr. Percival assures us, and only he and Sir Henry had keys. Yet the dagger's case was opened, and a faint scratch on its lock suggests a skilled hand. The gallery door, too, had a similar mark, forced, but tampered with, perhaps by someone who knew locks well. Percival's face paled, his spectacles slipping down his nose. I checked the case myself, he said, his voice unsteady. It was secure at 10, and I believe you, Miss Marple said. Your devotion to Sir Henry was clear, but you saw Mr. Langston near the gallery after his meeting, didn't you? You didn't mention it at first, perhaps out of loyalty or fear of trouble. Percival nodded, his shoulders sagging. I thought it was nothing. He was just looking. Miss Marple turned to Gibbs, her gaze gentle but piercing. And you, Mr. Gibbs, were at your post outside the gallery, except for a brief walk at midnight. A convenient moment, when a noise was heard, Mrs. Vane's thud, perhaps. You saw nothing, but a guard's absence, even for 10 minutes, leaves a gap. Gibbs' jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence as heavy as ever. Miss Marple's eyes settled on Langston, who met her gaze with a forced smile. And you, Mr. Langston, left at 9, your taxi receipt so neatly provided. Yet you were seen near the gallery, and in your office we found lock-picking tools. A dealer's tools, you said, but so useful for a locked case or door. Langston's smile faded, his hands clenching. You're spinning a story, Miss Marple. I was gone by 9. The drivers can be paid, Miss Marple said softly, and receipts arranged. In St. Mary Mead, a young man once paid a friend to swear he was elsewhere, but a neighbor saw him slip back. You slipped back, didn't you, Mr. Langston? Through the west gate, perhaps, using the shadows Gibbs couldn't see. Langston's face hardened, but he held his ground. You've no proof. Oh, but there's more, Miss Marple said, her voice as calm as a summer stream. The drop of blood by the back door, not Sir Henry's but yours. A cut on your hand, you said, from a glass. But the paint thinner on that cloth in the storage room, used to clean the Vermeer's frame. Perhaps to erase a fingerprint or a smudge. You knew the painting's value, Mr. Langston, and you had a buyer waiting, didn't you? The stranger in the village, seen by Mrs. Baker and Mr. Tuttle. Clara gasped, her hands rising to her mouth. Percival stared, his notebook forgotten. Gibbs shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing. Miss Marple continued, her tone gentle but relentless. You planned to take the Vermeere, Mr. Langston. You lingered. After your meeting, picked the gallery lock, and opened the dagger's case. But Sir Henry was there, working late, as he sometimes did. He caught you, and in a moment of panic, you used the dagger. A struggle, a cut on your hand, a drop of blood. Left behind. You took the painting, hid it, and slipped out through the back door, thinking your alibi would hold. Langston stood, his charm crumbling like dry plaster. This is absurd. You're an old woman with a wild imagination. Craddock stepped forward, his voice firm. We searched your office again, Langston, found a hidden safe with a forged provenance for the Vermeere, and a map of the manor's grounds marking the west gate. The blood by the door matches yours." Langston's face drained of color, his eyes darting to the door as if seeking escape. Then, with a shudder, he sank back into his chair, his hands covering his face. "I didn't mean to kill him," he whispered. "It was an accident. Henry was supposed to be in bed. I just wanted the painting. The buyer offered millions, enough to clear my debts. He came at me shouting, and I grabbed the dagger. It happened so fast." Clara's sob broke the silence, her hands trembling. Percival looked away, his shoulders hunched. Gibbs remained still, but his eyes held a flicker of relief. As if a weight had lifted, Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her scarf growing longer. "Desperation makes monsters of us all, Mr. Langston," she said. "But the truth always finds a way." Craddock signaled to the constables, who moved to Langston's side. "We found the Vermeere in a hidden compartment in your car," he said. "It's over, Langston." As the dealer was led away, his head bowed, Miss Marple rose, gathering her bag. "I'll leave you to your work, Inspector," she said. "Mrs. Vane, I'm so sorry for your loss." Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I never imagined." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch gentle. "We rarely do, my dear. But the truth has a way of healing, in time." As she walked back to St. Mary Mead, the first raindrops falling, Miss Marple's thoughts were calm, the puzzle complete. The truth had been there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for her to shine a light. Chapter 10. The quiet resolution, the rain that had threatened. St. Mary Mead all morning finally broke, as Miss Jane Marple reached her cottage, a gentle patter that softened the village's edges and lent a silvery sheen to the cobblestone lanes. She shook the damp from her shawl, hung her tweed coat by the door, and settled into her favorite armchair by the fire, the familiar comfort of her knitting bag at her side. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow over the room, and the scent of damp wool and tea leaves mingled in the air. The case of Sir Henry Vane's murder was solved, Roger Langston's confession ringing in her ears like the final note of a somber melody. Yet, as always, Miss Marple's mind lingered on the human threads of the tragedy, the motives and missteps that had unraveled a life. Cherry bustled in with a tray, her eyes wide with the village's latest talk. "Miss Marple, it's all over. St. Mary Mead, Mr. Langston, a murderer. They say he's been taken to the station, and the painting's been found. Mrs. Baker's telling everyone you solved it, like a proper detective." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile as she poured her tea, the steam curling upward like a question mark. "Nonsense, Cherry," she said, her voice as gentle as the rain outside. "I'm no detective, just an old woman who notices things. The police did the real work. Inspector Craddock is quite capable, you know." Cherry set the tray down, her hands on her hips. "Oh, go on, Miss Marple. Mrs. Tuttle says you had Mr. Langston pegged from the start, with his fancy suits and all. How'd you know it was him?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she resumed her scarf, the gray wool growing steadily under her fingers. "It wasn't knowing, Cherry, but seeing. People are so like their actions, aren't they? Mr. Langston's charm was like a polished frame, hiding a flawed canvas. The smudged frame, the scratched lock, the drop of blood, those were his mistakes, left in haste. And haste, my dear, is the enemy of secrecy." She sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting back to Vane Manor. The confession had been swift, Langston's polished facade crumbling under the weight of evidence, the lock-picking tools, the forged provenance, the blood by the back door, and the Vermeere hidden in his car. Yet Miss Marple felt no triumph, only a quiet sorrow for the greed that had driven a man to destroy what he claimed to value. She thought of a village tailor, Mr. Sims, who had once stolen cloth to pay his debts, only to lose his trade when the truth came out. Ambition, she knew, was a flame that could warm or burn. The fire popped, and Miss Marple's gaze settled on the flames, her mind retracing the case. Clara's veiled resentment had been real, but it was the ache of a neglected wife, not a killer's intent. Percival's nervous precision had masked fear, not guilt. His loyalty to Sir Henry keeping him silent about Langston's lingering presence. Gibbs' stoic absence at midnight had been a lapse, not a conspiracy, his silence born of duty rather than deceit. It was Langston, with his debts and his buyer, who had woven the crime. His charm, a distraction that failed to hide his desperation. A knock at the door broke her reverie, and Cherry ushered in Inspector Craddock, his coat damp from the rain. "Miss Marple," he said, shaking water from his hat, "I thought I'd find you here, knitting away as if you hadn't just cracked a murder case." Miss Marple smiled, gesturing to a chair. "Oh, Inspector, you give me too much credit. Would you like some tea? It's a dreary day." Craddock sat, his expression a mix of amusement and admiration. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple." Langston's confessed fully says he planned to sell the Vermeere to a collector in Zurich, clear his debts, and start fresh. He swears the stabbing was an accident, but the jury'll decide that. The painting's back in the gallery, undamaged, thank heavens. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking rhythmically. "Such a beautiful thing, that Vermeere. It's a pity beauty can inspire such darkness. But it's safe now, and that's what matters." Craddock leaned forward, his voice low. "How did you know, Miss Marple?" "The blood, the cloth, the lockmost. Would have missed them." She looked up, her blue eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "It's merely observation, Inspector. In St. Mary Mead, people are much like anywhere else. They leave traces of their truths, in a glance, a pause, a misplaced item. Mr. Langston's charm was too perfect, like a village boy who smiles too much when he's up to mischief. The clues were there, waiting to be seen." Craddock shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You make it sound simple, but I've seen detectives with less instinct. Will you be back at the manor, checking on Mrs. Vane?" "Oh, I think not," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "She has her own path to walk now, poor dear. Grief is a private thing, and she'll find her way. But I'll keep an eye from the village, as I always do." As Craddock left, promising to keep her updated, Miss Marple settled back by the fire, her knitting in her hands. The village's quiet rhythm resumed, the rain a soft murmur against the windows. Cherry hovered, eager for more, but Miss Marple waved her off with a smile. "The world is full of puzzles, Cherry," she said, "but they solve themselves if you watch closely enough." Her needles moved steadily, the scarf lengthening as the fire glowed. The case was closed, the Vermeere restored, Langston's fate in the hands of justice. Yet Miss Marple knew that St. Mary Mead, like any village, held more secrets, waiting in the shadows for her quiet gaze. As the rain fell, she knitted on, content in the knowledge that the truth, like a well-made stitch, always held fast in the end.